This is Simply Lovaii, and you're listening to the expert with a heart.
Continuing the ever valuable conversation on transitions in the context of financial planning and the role that financial transitionists can play to ease those transitions. Bringing another episode of Simply Lovaii with the expert with a heart, Lovaii Navlakhi, CEO and MD of International Money Matters Private Limited, and Susan Bradley, CFP, CEFT, and the founder of the Sudden Money Institute. If you haven't tuned into our previous podcast, we are exploring the area of transition in personal finance, and Susan brings her expertise as a financial transitionist, a concept that I was very recently introduced to. Welcome back, Lovaii. Susan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So on the last podcast, we did talk in detail about the idea of financial transition, right? What it entails, where it's applicable. And one big area that came up that is going to be relatable, for me. I'm happy. I told Lovaii this before. I use these podcasts quite selfishly sometimes to make notes about my own personal finance. But it's going to be applicable to most people who listen to this, right? And that is the idea of retirement. Now, retirement planning is always a big deal when it comes to personal finance and financial planning. It's always something you plan for. But I think, as we had discussed, brings a lot more to the table than meets the eye. So let's dive into that on today's podcast. Lovaii, Susan, let me open up the conversation with just talking about, the personal aspect of it. What have you noticed being the biggest problems or the biggest conundrums that come from retirement that people do not expect and are suddenly faced with?
I think, if I sort of stick to the money part for the time being, I think by default, the younger generation doesn't want to think about retirement. People tend to think about retirement a few years before they are actually going to retire. And that's when, all the sort of worries about calculating the numbers, etc., come to the fore. But I think it's a lot to do with just number. And younger people, I have noticed, particularly in India, in their 20s and maybe early 30s, talk about retiring at 40. And if they are in the 40s, they say at 50 or 55. But they just want to advance the date of retirement. Maybe it gives a sense of achievement that I've reached the number that I needed to reach. I don't want to be in the rat race. I really want to do what I truly desire, and money is not the driver for it. So I think that's the first thing we have to keep in mind when we are discussing retirement. But I leave it to Susan to talk about transition situations that we may come across.
Yeah, it's retirement. It seems to be the ultimate dream of people who have been working all their lives. But it's also a big event in financial planning because there's usually a liquidity event. There's maybe assets within a company. It could be retirement assets that are now going to be used for income instead of growth. So there's a tendency for financial planners to want to work with that liquidity event. So they call it, they have different names for it. They call it money in motion. But what we know is that there is a life in motion when there's a retirement that's coming. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a man who wanted to retire. He needed a year off, he felt, for family reasons. And then he was planning to go back as a consultant in his field. And he was searching for a financial planner. He met 4 of them. All 4 looked at the liquidity event and told them how they would invest his money quickly and get this return and whatever. So it was a very short meeting and they all felt very capable. The 5th planner that he talked to was one of our certified financial transitionists. And he said, wait a second, tell me more. And he's trained in listening. That's one of the things that we think is so important, to ask questions and to be able to really listen. And as he had an hour meeting with this man, he realized that this man's plan wasn't really going to work for him. But no one had told the man that. Mainly, one of the reasons was the consulting that he thought he could do, he hadn't really checked. This planner knew that industry and knew that he probably would not be successful as a consultant. Therefore, the money wasn't going to work. So he had to back up and explore a whole new plan. How could he take some time off for the family, take a sabbatical, but not fully retire? And that conversation made a huge life difference for that man and his family.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, no, that's very eye-opening, actually, and brings me to the idea, a bit too relatable, Lovaii, to, talk about the younger generation, because that is definitely the way I've been thinking about it. It shines a light, Susan, your response on also the idea of planning for well in advance, right? And that is something we're often encouraged to do, but we're not always as proactive as maybe we should be. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, the timelines of, starting to plan for retirement? Because how do you plan for a transition that hasn't even happened yet?
That is a big challenge. But we have a different lifeline that they're talking about now, that we'll probably be living longer. And that has consequences for the younger generation, such as yourself, because instead of having maybe a 30 or 40-year career, you might be looking at a 60-year career. There may be lots of ins and outs and changes that go along. In the meantime, you're saving for the future. You're saving for flexibility during your working years, as well as for the ability to retire and have no income, but have a great life at some point in the far future.
Yeah, and I think, some of this I see not just for people who have, a long time to retire, but I'm taking the example of someone who is, just about retiring at this point in time. I met him in the US about a couple of months ago, and he was retiring at the end of December of 23. And he was burnt out. He said, I've been, running on this treadmill of continuous work and working with different large companies, startups, accumulated good amount of wealth, had also a plan to be in India and do some social work, which his wife was leading, all of that. He was in this mode of, the will I be required by people? Will I still be wanted? Yeah, after I retire. So let me find a few things to do which will enable me to continue to work. He said, I don't think I can just be sitting at home. And as Susan said, go to the club and play golf and play cards or whatever. So I want to find things. And, as a result of his connection, he was having multiple conversations. And his whole objective seemed to be driven around that within the next month, before I retire, can I make sure I have all my time slotted and all the work in place? And I figured that one of the things in the conversation and some of the tools that we use from the program enabled me to figure out that really was his issue. And I was sitting and talking to him along with his wife, and I was saying, what's the rush? Why are you wanting to close all of this? You have enough money to, let's say, think about like a 6-month sabbatical and say over that time, figure out what you really want to do and then do it. But this was going on, and his wife was smiling saying, yes, that's what I've been telling him. But at the end of this, while all of this is going on, he also tells me, that, I am in the US, I know, but my son who's in Australia has just told us that he's expecting a child, and that's going to be my first grandchild in February. And I'm going to go and spend a month there. I'm saying, listen, you're just saying that you want to devote time. It's a new status that you're going to get of a grandparent, and that's a wonderful status. You are going to want to, spend time there. Why are you trying to fill all these up? And so I made him do one of the exercises of, wanting to go back in time and think of what really is making him happy, what is really driving him, what, made him feel most at ease, etc. And as a result, I met him last week in India, and he said, I decided I'm not going to take up anything at the moment. I am figuring out what to do. I'm so glad that I met you, that I was not rushed into taking a decision which might not have been correct. And maybe you would have got something great. And I told him, if you find really something that tugs at your heart, giving you the type of money that you want, keeping time available for you to do other things, and you love it, go ahead and take it. It's not that you are saying, don't take anything for 6 months. But if something really good, drops into your lap, go ahead ahead and take it. So I think some of these things which allow us as advisors to, think of ourselves not just as, I am going to tell you what to do, but I'm more going to listen to what you're saying and then go deeper and listen more and find out the real underlying driver for you and then guide you what you need to do, and you come up with the answer yourself. I think it's so much more meaningful, satisfying, easy, I would think.
That's such a good point, and it's logical. It just makes sense. Hear the story. The truth is, most people don't give themselves that time. They think they're supposed to know what to do. And if they don't know what to do, then they need to do something. They'll say any decision is better than no decision, which usually is not true.
That's what we were taught in MBA.
Yeah, just push through it. Just push through it. But to really structure this idea of a sort of a pause, not necessarily a timeout maybe, but a pause. And you give yourself some time to sink into it, to feel it, to go through your day-to-day life. You don't have to go to the ashram and figure it out. If you want to, that's a nice idea. But just going through your life knowing that I'm in a transition and he says I have a lot of time to make decisions. What would make me happy? Just have a light, just stay in the question is the way we talk about it. One way to get to that or to find out that you don't know is to work on what do you expect. If you were retired, what do you expect to have happen? When, why, how much, with whom? And we have a little chart that we use with that and have both the spouses do that. And you'll find that maybe there are gaps, or you'll find that they have competing ideas. And it's good to get through to those at the very beginning rather than when you're in retirement.
What I'm hearing is also interesting because a lot of this is planning for the uncertainty, right? So maybe the approach is also to, with your advisor, get advice on how you can plan for the moments that you don't know, so that when they do come, you do have the time to figure out your next step. And it also ties into, sorry, Susan?
I think it's allowing for uncertainty, uncertainty is something that actually works for you in transition rather than something to get rid of.
What happens in life situations is that, you have visibility up to a particular point. You're driving on the mountains, you're having some great views, and there is a sharp turn ahead. And you are thinking that the same view is going to continue. Maybe it does. Maybe it's, there's a steep valley coming there or a better climb coming there. You don't know what's coming there. So I think dealing with someone who has experienced this not through themselves, but through other clients, other human beings who've been through life, just as a warning saying, okay, you're driving down at 100 miles an hour. Just remember that, at the turn, there is a speed breaker and there are no signs. So just slow down a bit before you get there, and then you can zip back up again, once you decide which route you're going to take. So some of this becomes crucial in the understanding of asking questions for which you have no answer. I'll give you a very small example. So we are dealing with a client who's heading to retirement. He's been living and working in the US for a while, but he has, of course, an Indian connection. His children are somewhere in Europe. And he says, okay, great. We have decided we are going to spend 8 months of the year in A country and 4 months in B country. And we said, great. This is, it enables us to decide what type of money we want to leave in which jurisdiction and therefore what type of investment. The question to ask them, which we asked, is, this is what you will do if both of you are together. What happens if it's only A who is there? What happens if it's only B? And frankly, we don't know the answer. We don't know in what situation, at what time, one of them loses their life. But if your answer is going to change from these two countries to say, I'd much rather be closer to the kids, then there's a third country that I need to start thinking of. And you need to plan and say, I'm not putting all my chips on black or red or number 5 or whatever number that's your lucky number, because you need to have some chips left on the table for the next roll of the dice.
Right. So that brings me to my next question, and I might be completely wrong here in trying to draw a connection, but there are a couple of different stages, right, when it comes to retirement planning. There is before, there is someone who has just gone into retirement, and then there is someone who, has been in retirement for a while. So in all of these three stages, are there some common considerations, or are the considerations and questions to ask completely different?
So I think what happens is behavior changes, right? So people who are who are working and they're heading and planning for retirement, as Susan said, they have not visualized the day that, okay, I have stopped work yesterday. Am I still waking up at 5 o'clock? Am I still doing my run in the morning? I'm having this sort of thing and I'm leaving at 7:30 for work or 8 o'clock for work. That's not happening, right? So you've not visualized that day and you're suddenly feeling, oh God, what's changed? This feels like a tsunami, it's totally different. And we've seen this happen. Very aggressive oriented clients who work through their life and wanting to have aggression, the moment they retire, suddenly find that if one part of their investment, which is maybe a tiny 2% of their net worth, has fallen by 2%, that calculation will tell you that it's hardly an impact on their net worth. They are now extrapolating that what happens if the same thing happens with the other 98%. And again, one of the things that we learn in this program is, can we sort of create separate buckets for the client to feel comfortable that, what you need for your day-to-day living, this is where the money is invested. There is absolutely no impact. This is the portion which is going to enable you to beat inflation, and that's all in place. And this is the part where you don't need to think of this is what you need 10 years, 15 years later in your retired life. It's not impacting you. And the moment we did this for this client, he was very calm and he was back again soon. And I think it's also a question of a time to adjust. So maybe it takes 1-2 years. I don't have research data. I don't know if Susan has, but it takes some time for them to start feeling comfortable in this new phase of retirement. And then they were back to, let's take some aggressive calls. So I've seen that sort of change happen. So it's not a switch, right? It's not till yesterday I was working, now I'm retired, so I have to behave. I'm that same human being, but I go through a huge change of emotion, right?
Okay, the data is about 3 years.
It's 3 years? Okay, so good. 2 years was not bad.
It's 4.5 years for people who sell their business, and it's about 5 years for a widow. So we were talking about some things. So those are just general, and everybody is situational. But I'll tell you an interesting story. A woman, she retired very well. And I said to her, so how do you like retirement? What's it like for you? And she said, every day is Saturday. And I said, just offhanded, do you like Saturdays? And she said, not really. And I said, oh my gosh, what is that? So she said, my time is my own. I can do this and that. My husband, whatever. And she very healthy, very active. So I said, so how do you get out of Saturdays? Because Saturday used to be followed by Sunday, then Monday, and you were back at work. So she said, I'm not really sure yet. And what she did is she reached out to people, first in her family, that were struggling with careers and this sort of thing. She started coaching a little bit, and that was fun. So the coach days were not Saturdays. So she started to block her calendar with non-Saturdays. And she's ended up being somewhat of a part-time CEO of a nonprofit where she's collecting other people like herself with these great skills that are now available to nonprofits as well as students. So there's kind of coaching sort of thing, but she had to do it to get rid of her Saturdays. So free time is not always welcome time. It's and it's also it's sort of difficult with couples to figure out what to do. They say, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch, and things like that. There's some truism there, and it's okay. You just make it okay. It's normal. So let's try different things. Let's make an adventure out of it.
I also think that as people who are say retiring in let's say in their 60s, there's a feeling that, they are from a different generation from the 20, 30-year-olds. But what we seem to remember is that maybe they have children of that age, so they understand some of the behavior there. And I am starting to see a reflection of the younger people's behavior of, what Susan mentioned earlier, of having multiple careers, not focusing on just one thing, but sort of jumping around because, hey, that's also interesting. Let me try that new thing out because that seems to be of interest to me. And okay, if it doesn't work, I move on and do something else. But I'm seeing the 60-year-olds who have retired from large organizations focused on one function, really thriving and enjoying themselves, helping, a medium-scale enterprise where they knew somebody there, they got involved, and in a totally different function. So they are learning new things. And I think that's one of the key things that we have to bring to the attention of people who we deal with, that, if the olden days, if you retired at 60 and you probably lived for, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, that sort of period, it was okay because you worked 40 years, you were retired for 10 years, for a decade, and then, the rest of the family got your assets and moved on. If it's changing now to living till 100, and I just heard, and you did hear on the earlier podcast that, children who are born today in the US will live to 143, I believe. That's the number I hear. But I do know personally of a bunch of people who have, celebrated their 100th birthday. And I certainly didn't know of any 20 years ago. So that's changing. And if the time is going to be long, you want to be relevant, you want to be alert, right? You don't want to have a situation where, you wither away.
So I think the word retirement is going to get retired. I think it's words like refirement and rewirement, or maybe it's just reboot. And doesn't mean what it used to mean. It's the way it's going to go. Money is always going to be important. Life skills for managing change is important because change, big disruptive life events are when people can make their best or their worst decisions. And they have lost usually their executive capacity to make their best. With some help, they can find a way to get back their high functioning. Stress can be really a good thing. You can work with stress. So if you know how to manage change, you're not overwhelmed and incapacitated by it. You can manage it. You have guides. Then you can make good decisions from one career spot to another or one life dedication to another. I think it's probably the most important skill set. Know what your weaknesses, know what your strengths are, and work with them each time life pivots.
Yeah, absolutely. But, this brings me to an important question I definitely want to ask both of you. As transitionists who have probably, supported clients through so many different kinds of transitions, but specifically in the area of retirement, they always, there is unfortunately that adage, right, of money can't buy happiness. And now it's changed into, of course it can, if you use it wisely. And plan well. So in retirement, across your clients, when have you noticed your clients are the happiest? And if you could tie that into, the decisions of financial planning that got them there, that would be really useful.
I think one of the things that I'm going to attempt this, Susan, but I think one of the things that will give them happiness is if they have clarity, confidence, and control. And, if they are clear what they're doing, they are confident about it. And most importantly, it's not being driven by somebody else. It's what they really want to do for themselves. It might be, impacting others. It might be working for an NGO. It might be working with, deprived children, whatever. But it's something that I want to do. And it's not, my family says this or my spouse says this or, I've seen my mentor doing this, so I should also do the same thing. I think those are the most crucial things that, that will give them happiness is what I'm guessing.
The data out on this question is interesting. They say the decade of the 70s is the happiest. And people in the 70s could either agree or disagree on that. Some people will say, oh, heck, if this is my happiness, this ain't so great. So sometimes it doesn't work. But I think it's when you know that you can manage life. And what Lovaii said, clarity, you have confidence, and you have a sense of agency or control over your life. And frankly, you can have that in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. It's knowing that when life throws something at you, you can deal with it. You've got that. It might not be what you want, but you know that you'll make it through. I think that that's a wonderful way to look at life, to just keep moving. You know that life is about change events. That's what evolution is. And if you can manage it yourself, and that's what we do with certified financial transitionists. They help their clients understand their best way to manage life events. They help encourage and build those kinds of life skills so that you can absorb the shock each time life shifts.
No, that's a really beautiful way of looking at it, Susan. Thank you so much. And thank you once again, both of you, for the insights. I think, to embrace change and embrace the fact that it's a part and parcel of life can definitely be very, very helpful, and also give you a sense of control, right? Make you feel more empowered throughout life. And it's definitely valuable to look at life in that way, no matter which stage you're at, right? Before retirement, at retirement, or post-retirement, or reboot. I like that one. Today, we've spoken about, on this episode, something that you can plan for, right? But there is another very important situation that transitionists have to deal with quite often, which is the unplanned area where you lose someone, a loved one, and that completely changes your life, in every aspect. Everyone, stay tuned to Simply Lovaii and catch all three of us on the next podcast and the final one in this series, because that's sure to get you thinking about the role of transitions in your financial planning journey. Lovaii, Susan, I'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you so much.
That was an episode of the Simply Lovaii podcast series, Expert with a Heart.